Welcome everybody to today's DEI committee meeting. My name is Tibisay Hernandez and I will be calling the meeting to order. So could I get a motion to call the meeting to order, please? Mary? And I see Blanca as a second. Okay, wonderful. And we had our regular meeting minutes that were sent out for September 15, 2022 at 7 p.m. So our DEI meetings were sent out to everyone for review prior to this meeting. So if I could get a motion to approve our prior meetings minutes. I see a Blanca for first and Christina for second. Thank you. All right, and we will jump into our agenda items, starting with our reports from our subcommittees. So I don't know if somebody wants to volunteer to go, or if folks want to.
I don't mind volunteering to go, Tibisay.
Thank you for putting me out of my misery there. Appreciate it.
No problem. So I was on the communications subcommittee. We met on last Wednesday, the 12th. We discussed that one of our top goals for this year is to be able to demonstrably demonstrate to district stakeholders the work that is already happening and continues to happen on DEI, including highlighting more student efforts and communicating the work with progressive partners. We're going to aim for a once a month approximately post utilizing our different forums, including Facebook, Twitter, Insta, and the school website, in order to facilitate regular community updates. I didn't really take a lot of notes during this meeting. I wasn't aware I was going to be presenting, so that's all I've got. But I promise to be more detailed next time.
I was going to say, I took notes, Rebecca, because I thought I was sharing, but I appreciate you doing.
Oh, thanks, Seema.
I think the only other, and I think you alluded to this, that the idea that was brought up that maybe the communications committee work on some talking points that the principals could share at their faculty meetings. That way, the 7 buildings know what's happening at the DEI meetings, just because there's so many meetings happening all the time. It's hard to keep up. But yeah, I think you got it all.
All right, wonderful. So report from another committee. I'm blanking on the committee names, Matt. So whenever you want to help me, that would be awesome.
I was going to let it sit. The next one is community engagement. I'm trying to remember who was going to do community engagement.
Are you for real, Matt? Okay, so community engagement is myself. So we had a really great conversation about what we were doing last year and how we can continue that work into this year, specifically with our touch points that we started last year with the PTAs. So last year we were able to identify liaisons for each of the PTAs. And this year it turns out that we were able to do the same. So we want to be a resource to the PTAs. And again, pretty much like the communications committee, have a point where folks that are on the PTA or parents can come and ask us questions about what we're doing in the DEI committee. And also for the future work of the district, us be a great resource to talk about the initiatives that, focus groups and different things that are coming down the pike, for recruitment purposes, for those things. We could also be helpful in that mechanism as well. And we also talked about initiatives within the school. We talked about a cool idea called the Human Library, and thinking about ways in which we can get parent volunteers or community member volunteers to showcase their heritage and their culture in the schools. So we were thinking about maybe like a little traveling human library where, people post up in each of the school building libraries and the kids get to come up and have that adult share a piece of their history and their heritage, and just for as a point of engagement, and as a point of celebration as well of the diversity that we have within our school district. And I know that I'm missing one more thing that we discussed, but I'm blanking on that. So Mary or Matt, if I feel like I missed something. I'm not sure.
You got those are the main things really. And then the only other thing was just about advocating for maybe even virtual or hybrid meetings for PTAs as well, just to increase community engagement. That was the other thing.
Michael, I see your hand.
Thanks, Tibise. I have a question, and maybe we can think about this. Right now, PTA meetings have the principal attends, a board member is assigned to attend, and a teacher rep is assigned to attend. What if we had a DEI committee member assigned to attend?
So that's exactly what the subcommittee discussed. So that's kind of, we appointed a person to each building. And last year, what we did is we sent a letter to the PTA president, just letting them know, introducing ourselves as the liaison, letting them know that we would like to attend, not to intrude, not to make things longer in any way, but more as a source of support, and as a way of visibility and transparency, so that if parents had questions or folks had any questions for us, that we would be able to respond in real time and talk to folks about what the DEI committee is looking to do.
That's awesome. And then it becomes like a standing agenda item on all 7 buildings, sort of PTA agenda, which is great. I love it.
That's what we're hoping. We didn't have a person for each building. I think we had 5 out of the 7. So we are still looking to engage other members. It was our first subcommittee meeting. So as new subcommittee members jump into those meetings, we're hoping to get representation for all 7 of the buildings. But right now we have 5 out of 7. Altamont and Westmere were the 2 that we don't have representation for. I'm going to butcher your name, and I hate when people butcher mine. Tayani.
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay.
I was just going to say that. So I'm the Linwood PTA president as well, and Lewis came to our meeting last week and did a little speech, and it was great.
Thank you, Lewis. All right. If I am remembering my committees, which I'm not, Matt.
I I'll assist. We have research and then student voice.
Okay, perfect. So if someone from the research committee is on and could provide us with an update.
Hi, I'm Julianne. A synopsis of our research subcommittee meeting is we're all new members. So we sort of took the space to explore what our goals and what kind of thinking we had for a brand newly assembled subcommittee would be. We did discuss the possibility of looking at sort of DEI iterations across local districts, like what are other districts doing with their DEI space and research. We also explored the concept of the school calendar and whether it is encompassing, reflective, and representing the diversity at Guilderland. We did discuss Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day representation on our calendar, and we again sort of wondered what other districts were looking at and were doing. So we sort of left ourselves with some assigned work that we're each going to take a couple of local districts and thus canvas like between 8 and 12 local districts and sort of look at school calendars, representation, and explore sort of that representation piece across the school calendar. We also discussed how the school calendar is sort of initially rolled out through Capital Region BOCES as a regional calendar, and then districts sort of make their tweaks from that. So we discussed possibly exploring how that process begins at the Capital Region BOCES regional calendar development level. Anything I'm missing, Matt? Okay, great.
All right, Student Voice Committee.
So the Student Voice Committee is new this year. So it's a completely new committee. So a lot of our meeting was spent just figuring out what direction we want to take this in and like what roles each member would have. So some of our goals are to bridge like connections between like what people think about the school versus the real experience of students. We want to make sure that adults aren't creating solutions for problems that don't exist, that we're not pretending that something is bigger than it is. We want to make sure that we start to listen to what students have to say about issues and make this like a standard part of our goal setting process. And for the students, some of our goals are to look for students who might be interested in joining this work and making sure it's like a diverse range of students, not just, and like that goes like of what classes you're in, what your background is, what sort of friends you have, to make sure that we get like a good representation of the whole school. And we think it's important that maybe some of the Board of Education members and committee members on this committee come to high school events and like listen to what students have to say and sort of take in what the high school's actually like. And for some of like the student roles, something we wanted to start was doing like presentations at elementary schools and Farnsworth Middle School. We wanted to possibly participate in like more community-wide events. Like one of the examples was like the Pride Parade, and like advertise like more opportunities to students to participate. So some of our action items are like advertise the existence of this committee so that people know that they can join. Possibly reach out to teachers and like other administrators to nominate students who they think might be strong leaders both in the present as well as in the future, and make sure that our group is diverse and reflects like different aspects of like the student life.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much for that update. So now we're going to transition into our DEI in action section. And Matt?
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I also doubly appreciate the duty that you've taken on. So just thank you. I'll give you some snaps for taking.
Stop.
So in regards to DEI in action, there are a few different items that I wanted to update everyone about. The first of which is really just about the fact that the Equity Institute that we're doing in conjunction with Progression Partners, we were able to gather the group, and we did something on October 3rd, and staff are going to be gathered again on the 24th. So this is formed from equity teams in each one of our buildings that are comprised of folks in different capacities, ranging from administrators to teachers, clerical, TAs, so on and so forth. And so we have a cross-section of individuals making up equity teams in each building who are engaging in institute work, where this is really learning and trying to frame our mentality and our approach as we get into our actual equity planning, which is really going to kick off in January and be something that's going to carry us through the spring. The other thing is I want to share just that a discussion did happen in district in the past month in regards to equity with food service, where concern was raised just about what kind of offerings do we have, and making sure that we're able to meet the dietary restrictions of our student body. And so we kind of explored that process and saw how the process for food service happens, that it's not necessarily something that is completely just customizable, that it's bid-based, and that contracts are for an extended period of time. I think it's at least just worth sharing that this is a discussion that happened in district. And from my last exposure with it, I think all parties felt heard and felt seen. But this is just one of the examples of things that we do encourage folks to reach out if you have a concern and it feels like, oh, I'm not sure if this is something that's okay to bring up. Please do ask, because We want to talk, we want to engage with you, and we want to answer questions. And I've said this before, I'll say it again, I certainly do not have the answer to every question. I don't even know that I have the answer to most questions, but there are a lot of really talented and intelligent folks around our district who will have answers. So I definitely wanted to share that portion as well. There are two other things that I wanted to share, one of which is an update about the multicultural calendar of observances that's available on the district website. Earlier in the month, really, and into September as well, this calendar was shared out with staff, and it was really incredible and encouraging. The number of responses that came forward with folks noting different things that we had missed on the calendar. And that's definitely a practice that we want to kind of keep open, and certainly formally right now to invite community members to do the same. If there's something that you note missing on that district multicultural observance calendar, I'll put myself out there again. I certainly do not know every single observance, and I can't. But the beauty of it is this is meant to be a collaborative thing. This is definitely meant to be something that all of us are building together. Really with the purpose of recognizing and supporting the diverse backgrounds and celebrations of the folks that make up our district. So for the last part of DEI in action, this is something that we wanted to open up to committee members to talk about, because it is something that is happening in our community. And I want to frame this discussion that happens with just a very important reminder. There's been a lot of movement specifically at Gilderland High School, but in our discussion that's been happening about events over the past week, it is of the utmost importance that not only should we not, but we are not allowed to, and we cannot talk about any sort of student information, whether, certainly not names of any students, certainly not any personal identifiable information, such as just any kinds of things that would be indicating anything that could be used to identify any students. And so these are just things that we have to keep in mind, and that we definitely do need to make sure that they're at the centerpiece and hold that as a really, really important tenet of the conversation that's to follow. That is part update, but also we want to leave it open to commentary from folks on the committee as well. Dr. Wiles, is there anything that I'm forgetting with that before we kind of dive in? Okay.
No, that was well put. I'll take my mic off.
Okay. So just providing a little bit of background, I'll share what we've kind of seen already out in the news, partially stemming from events that happened last Friday, where there were some students at a football game who ended up going on. Their theme was blackout, and some students ended up painting their face black. This led to some social media sparking happening. And really, what this is centered on is there ended up being a protest and really a demonstration, a rally, a walkout from over 100 students at the high school on Tuesday. And a large part of that was centered not so much in the incidents of the past weekend. Honestly, really, that was a fraction of it. It's really centered on stories that unfortunately may sound familiar for some folks on this committee. Stories of students' pain, stories of being marginalized, stories that I think it'd be impossible to listen to and not be moved by. And right now we sit at a bit of a juncture where it's really important for us to be able to think not just where we are, but where is it that we want to go. And so noting that the struggles that students are talking about are not necessarily new struggles. It's not something that that just arrived. The stories really go back to when many of these students were in elementary school and kind of their progression K-12. So our conversation is, how do we move forward as a community, and how do we move forward as a district?
So just to talk a little bit about some of the ideas that Matt and I and others are batting around was the importance of making sure we provide a place for students to share what's on their mind. And by this, we mean all students within our school population. So we're thinking about creating some smaller focus groups. You know, at the gathering on Tuesday morning, there were over 100 students there, but not everyone had the opportunity to speak or was inclined to speak in such a large setting. And there were certainly lots of students who, you know, decided to stay in class. And so we want to provide some smaller forums for students to come forward. And it kind of echoes what Maxine said in her report, to tell the story of the actual lived experiences of our students in our school as a window into how do we make our school environment that safe, welcoming, warm, inclusive place for every single student. So that's what we're thinking about. And Matt, I'll let you drive the ship here.
All right, thank you. And again, just I realize that I might sound redundant, but just a reminder in all this discussion that this is not really focused on any students in particular, and so we're not going to be going into anything that would be used an identification of anyone. So go ahead, Maxine. Oh, I think technology is having a field day in this one.
Yeah, I thought she might have frozen.
Yes. All right, Seema?
I just wanted to say one thing, that I know that we're not talking about students, but just my own opinion, and that this is really an example of how adults can fail students. I just, you know, without getting into details of anything, I feel like this is an example of when adults who might live in a bubble or who might not be thinking through things really set students up. And I really think that, again, not speaking to the student part, but I feel like this is a perfect example of why everybody in the school, we're always focusing on what students need to learn, but it's also the people that work there need to think about. So they're setting our students up for success. I personally just believe that this was setting students up for failure overall. This is just sharing my own opinion.
Thank you. Maxine?
I mean, as a student who's currently in the building right now, I don't think that the building is creating a safe place for students on either side of the discussion. I feel like our school's very divided right now. I think that this issue has really like brought that to center. I feel like both sides of the discussion, you can't say anything without being attacked from either side. And I think that creates something dangerous when you can't have a civil conversation. I think that you should always be able to have that, no matter how polarizing or upsetting the point is. And I think that maybe it's like what Dr. Rivera said, it's a failure of something going on. But I think that a focus group would be good. I think that anything like this is tough because it's, again, there's very strong opinions, but I just personally feel like the school is very divided. I feel like it's just like something new every day, and sometimes I just want to get to class like these, and like I hope that there's like a way to handle this where students can feel like more comfortable in the high school and more comfortable to talk to each other and have like a safer space to do that than in the middle of a hallway in like during passing time.
Thank you. Mary?
I'm Maxine. I just want you, when you talk about the school being divided, are we talking very much along racial lines we're divided? Is it cultural? Is it socioeconomic? Are there all different divides?
I really think there's a lot of different divides. I haven't seen a specific like indicator of the side that people are on right now. I think that it's just a matter of like personal opinion, like relationships to people on either side. I don't think it's like anything distinguishable.
So it's just like there's a lot of pocket groups within the building. Thank you.
Maxine, do you think it would be too broad a brush to say that right now, just currently, that there's sort of this feeling of it's a big deal versus it's not a big deal?
I think that's like a great way to put it. I think that there's this attitude of like it was a harmless mistake versus they knew what they were doing. And I think that this, like, I think that's like a really good way to put it of like, it's a big deal versus it's not a big deal.
And certainly I don't mean to characterize, you know, what people were saying before, that this has also brought up not just situation at hand, but how it was handled, the discussions surrounding, and that it brought up memories and experiences and raw wounds by saying it's big deal, not big. I don't mean to diminish, but just for this, like the current situation and the current feelings.
I think that this issue has been made bigger than the issue. I think this was like a tipping point, but here's all the things before that happened. I think that like it's like it's a tipping point. It's like the small thing that gave people the strength or the motivation to say something. So I think that there's like growth that can come from this, but this is like the thing that's really caused people to speak out, like people who I've personally never heard their voices speak out. And it's a refreshing, it's unfortunate that it had to come from this, but it's a refreshing thing for me to hear.
Nina, and then Tibisai, and as we're thinking about this too, you know, really centering in how do we move forward with the things that we're hearing from Maxine. You know, we're hearing these are challenges we're facing, so how do we move forward with them? So go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I was going to speak to as well. Maxine, first of all, I just want to say thank you for sharing that. It's just heartbreaking to hear that. And I think, you know, so it's obviously, it sounds like the first step is this breakthrough of this opportunity for kids to speak out. That sounds like the first step. So where does the work come next? So once they speak out, how do we reassure them that their voices are going to be heard beyond the immediate moment? You know, what can we do to make the change that's going to go beyond that? And I hear what you're saying about how can the building properly address it. To me, the issue starts earlier, right? So obviously we can't go back in time, but moving forward, you know, not just handling this one moment, but the issue, right, as Maxine has said, is far deeper. This just brought it to light. So where does the work begin? I mean, I know there's the discussions about the trainings for the faculty to try to be open to that, but the kids really need it. I mean, how do we get to the kids and how do we help them to understand? Because, I mean, let's face it, they see it in the world. It's beyond the high school, it's the world. And how do we as a committee reprogram or reteach what needs to be taught in a way that's going to address this and be a way to confirm all these kids and their voices that are coming through?
Yeah, thank you. And I definitely do want to agree with your point that this is broader than the four walls of any building in the district, that this really, I think a lot of the weight of it comes from the fact that it is a societal thing. And it's how do we approach that, and how do we move forward? Yeah, to the side.
Right. So a lot of what I've heard so far is basically what we're trying to do and accomplish with this committee is, you know, we are a part of a system, and we have created this committee to look at that system and look at pockets and places where we can impart some knowledge and create a different type of culture, which is definitely going to take time. And sadly, because of that, there are still students that are going to experience things that are unpleasant as we're going through this arc of learning and understanding how to de-escalate, how to confront, and how to identify, because a lot of this also has to do with folks not having the language. These students are sharing their stories of microaggressions and macroaggressions that they may have experienced. I like to call those mosquito bites. So if you think about mosquito bites, if you're in a particular area and you're used to that area, maybe mosquitoes will only bite you once or twice. But if you're new to the area, maybe the mosquitoes will bite your entire body. And when they're biting your entire body, that last bite, you're like, oh my God, why is nobody else freaking out? Look at me. I'm covered in mosquito bites. Help me. And that other person's like, it's not that big of a deal. It's 1 or 2 mosquito bites. Why are you freaking out? Right? And there's a great video that illustrates that point, that when you don't go through life getting bit by mosquitoes, it's really easier. It's a lot easier to say it's not a big deal, right? And I think that it falls somewhere in the middle. And we need to have facilitated conversations and help the students have these facilitated conversations to understand that when you're going through life and having these experiences and they're multiple, that last experience, that straw that broke the camel's back experience, that intention of that person who did that may have not been the impact. So that's another conversation that has to be had, right? Exploration of impact or exploration of intentions, but acknowledgement of the impact. And how do we listen to folks that are impacted by our actions? So I agree that it has to start earlier, but it has to start with our families as well, because we have to understand that there are people who live in bubbles and whose expectations are that we don't have these discussions, because the thought process is that if we have these discussions, what we're doing is just perpetuating more hate. When in reality, if we don't confront these issues, they're going to continue to happen. So I'd say that it starts even before the elementary school level, with parents, when we're talking about parenting and the values of our Guilderland community, and what we want to really showcase these conversations, and maybe even start parent support groups before the kids even get into the school districts. Maybe something that is school district led, but hey, for parents of young children that want to learn before their kids are even in elementary school, how to have discussions about what they're going to see in elementary school, which are families that look different and families that are diverse from what's happening in their own home. So those are my 2 cents on that.
Thank you. And I also couldn't agree more with what Chris put in the chat about this being a good connection with the reading for this week. And I think because we do have kind of an action-packed agenda in our learning components where we can circle back to some of the same themes of what it is that we're expressing right now. So thank you, everyone. And Maxine, absolutely appreciate, hearing the perspective as the student who is kind of in this and where our focus really should lie. With that said, I did a little bit of this earlier, but Dr. Wiles, do you want to go into a bit of an audit update?
Sure. Thanks, Matt. So we are continuing our work with Progression Partners. And as Matt mentioned, we had our last session with our equity teams, one from each of the 7 buildings on October 3rd. We have another one training session scheduled for all day on October 24th. And then the final one of those trainings will be on December 5th. And then, as I mentioned last time we were together, from there, our equity teams will start putting together the action plans that will help us move our work forward. And then the other thing I'll mention, November 1st is the Superintendent's Conference Day. And Natalie McGee will be in Guilderland, and she will be doing like a 45-minute overview for all of our faculty and staff. She's going to do 3 workshops that we're going to get all of our staff to, so that she can provide kind of a big picture overview of the work that we're doing and why we're doing it and how we're doing it, so that even those who aren't on the equity teams can feel some firsthand connection, first to Natalie, but also to see some insight into the work. And then during that same first week of November, Natalie will be working with our teams to do what are called equity walks, which are walkthroughs of each of our buildings to gather through observation a sense of the climate and culture of each of our buildings. And that will be part of the information that is used to develop our action plans. So there's a lot going on in October, November, and December. And so far, I think the work has been going really very well.
All right. Are there any questions for Dr. Wiles on the equity audit update? All right. Then I think, Matt, it's back to you for the learning component discussion.
All right. Thank you. And so something I'm very excited about is our book that we have for this year. I do hope that everyone has been having a positive experience with it so far. This month, what we're going to be discussing is really the foreword, the introduction, and then chapters 1 and 2. And because this is really the first month that we're looking at it, I feel so happy about it. I want to kind of show it to the camera. A Place to Belong is the title of our book. And just for folks who this may be your first meeting that you're watching, the way that our learning component goes, or at least has gone for a while now, we'll center around a couple of different questions and have those as the crux of discussion, and folks can feel free to chime in and out with their thoughts, their feelings about this, what speaks to them. And we'll kind of go through this with the 2 chapters, and as well as the forward and introduction. So the first question that I wanted to put out for the group, it's the first one of the discussion questions. So what does identity is prismatic mean to you? And how does this relate to your family? And I'll even open that up more. It can be, how does it relate to your family? We can think about how this relates to your building, how this relates to our community. Identity is prismatic. What does that mean to us? Yes, go ahead.
So when I think about that phrase prismatic, or I think about a prism. And when I think about my identity, when I step into different rooms, it's almost like different light is shining through my identity prism. And that different light highlights different sides, different colors of who I am. So in certain rooms, it might be my Dominican ancestry that shines through more. It might be my gender expression that shines through when I enter into another room. It might be my identity as a mother, right? So when I think about the prism, is so many different sides, and depending on where you're looking at that prism, you might see different shades of light, different colors. So I when I think about that, I like that visual because it's ever changing, but the different pieces of that prism or that different size are so concrete. They're so me and make up who I am. But depending on what angle you're looking at me from, you might be seeing a different side, a different shade of light, a different part of who I am. And depending on what rooms I'm walking into, I might turn so that you see a different side of me. Maybe one day you're going to see the professional side of me, and one day you're going to see the hangout Tibby side of me. So there's just a lot of beauty in the multifacetedness that is expressed by looking or thinking about identity as a prism, in my opinion.
Thank you. And I love that, what vantage point you're looking. Even just from multiple, yeah. Yes. Mike Laster?
Totally agree. Like what struck me was the how the prism reference, like you could be perceived differently by people based upon their observations of you, right, in different situations. So absolutely agree with you, Tibise. I also wonder what people think about the phrase belonging requires claiming, because that also struck a little bit with me too, in terms of how does that resonate in terms of my experiences and my work. So I'd be interested in hearing people's thoughts on that.
Julianne?
I really loved what Tibise said. Anyways, I thought you said it so beautifully. One of the things that struck me about that line was it reminded me that identity isn't stationary, that there's a movement to it the same way that there's a movement to light and a movement to a prism. And I'm actually reading another book right now. It's a coaching book called Do Hard Things. And he talks about how in order to be truly confident and truly excel at what you're doing, you have to be willing to change your identity and accept growth as part of your identity. And it's funny, when I read that, especially that claiming who you are and being your authentic self, it reminded me of that identity is changing, it is evolving. And that's part of the work, is to be comfortable with who you are now, but also be working towards being who you're going to be next.
I love that. Mary and then Savannah.
I think one of the things that struck me about the part of that book, and it really ties into what we talked about earlier, was the author had always looked at her, prism chandelier as something not very attractive. And it wasn't until her son saw the light and was squealing with delight at the colors and how beautiful it was. And maybe coming back to what Maxine was saying, even more so, we should start to look at the things around us through their eyes, through the eyes of the students, for the eyes of the kids who are in the halls, and how do they see things? How are they perceiving things? Instead of sitting back how we perceive them.
Savannah, and then Nina, and then Chris.
When I think of prism, I sort of think of like rusted diamond, and then in the sense that like this is kind of going off of what Julianne was saying, but in like a different sort of perspective. It's sort of like you're not just like, what Julianne said was that you were sort of like changing who you are because it's like fluctuating, but I feel like it's more of like discovering and uncovering who you are as a person, like by slowly shining away like each part of the prism till it's like just one crystalline, like sparkly prism, and that in the end you like uncover who you truly are, in the sense that like you're going through the bouts of life through experiences and this and uncovering this and that. And that's what's so beautiful about like how identity is prismatic. I think that's what's so amazing about it.
I like the identity as self-discovery. Kind of, that's what I was hearing from you. Nina, and then Chris.
Yeah, I really like that complex viewpoint of it as being a growth kind of thing, and like independent. And along the lines, something that she said, and I believe it was within the chapter, she said, celebrate differences amid kinship. And that was something that helped to satisfy some of my I would say confusion, but she was talking about the importance of this, of embracing diversity and not being colorblind, right? So this idea of this prism of being this multifaceted person, but also this idea of kinship. So being able to relate to each other, not even despite, but because of our differences, but because we are different and unique, how do we come together and learn from each other? To me, that's also a prism in the sense of society, in the sense of community, and learning how to see each other's differences because they are there, and learning how to embrace them, and also at the same time see that we're all people. So to be people and share that human basic, need to survive and to fit in, but at the same time be different, is a remarkable goal. I think that really hit home for me.
I really like that. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Chris, and then Rebecca.
I like, obviously we all like the prism metaphor. One thing that struck me was, I talk a lot about to kids about different parts of their identity and who they are. There was a quote, "When I didn't have to take up space just being Black, people perceived me as so many other things along with being a young Black woman." I underlined, I starred, and I put a Post-it note on that one. Because I think sometimes I worry that not just our kids, but adults too, feel like they have to be the voice for one thing constantly. And we ask them to do that. So when Maxine was speaking about student experience, I feel like the people who are in the struggle are constantly having to do so much more of the work than necessarily the people who need to be seeing all the pieces of the prism, because we're also always asking people to be that one part of who they are and be the voice and we forget you're also an athlete, you're also this, you're also that. You have so many beautiful pieces to you, and you constantly feel like you have to shine one light and be in that one room. And how can we help take a little bit of that weight off so that people can actualize all the parts of their personality and their identity?
Yeah, thank you. And that is, yeah, I think about that a lot too. The light that we ask people to shine, not just the light that they choose to shine or that gets shown in that space. And by asking that light to repeatedly shine, are we potentially and inadvertently dimming other lights that could foster? Rebecca, and then Kylie, and then Lewis.
I think I'm going to sound repetitive and less eloquent than everyone else that already spoke, but I really loved that the author just kept going back to that notion of the prism and the colorfulness of it and the chandelier, and really contrasted it repeatedly with sort of being colorblind and that whole colorblind concept. It seemed like to her, the idea of the prism was really rich and multidimensional. And she contrasted that, I think, with the more anemic nature of this one-dimensional colorblind contrast. And I think that anemic colorblind contrast really lends itself to being sort of muted and inert and not willing to change and grow, which sort of gets to what Julianne was saying and many other people were saying.
Yeah, thank you. And please don't worry about being repetitive or sounding less eloquent. That's that spot's occupied by me. Repeat what everyone says to make it sound worse. So, Kylie, and then Lewis.
I just wanted to quickly jump back to what Mary said, and that teachers and students who show more of themselves besides a student or teacher become more popular and more appealing to students.
That part's huge. Yeah, absolutely. That part's huge. Lewis, and then Nina, and then Tivasai.
Yeah, I had some thought when I read this chapter. Pull back the curtains. Library of the Windows, about introducing the books to children at different ages. Well, I had this experience talking to my son, who is a second grader. He when I tried to correct some of his unfavorable habits, or something that I tried, some tendencies or practice that I thought not correct. He usually said everyone's different. I mean, I'm different in this aspect. You cannot like ask me to do something that I don't like. It tend to escape. I was raised in a sort of a society. Everyone was asked to follow the discipline or some sort of model, which was, I guess, was an issue. But when I constantly hear that my son or some other people to emphasize their differences, that kind of also worries me a little bit. There are certain common sense or value. Like how to balance these two. I'm thinking like as a parent, it's a hard topic for the education. But I try to kind of think what can help in this regard. We can discuss how to balance the difference and common values and in terms of DEI, also equity perspective.
Yeah, that feels like $1 million question. So I'm gonna kick it to Nina.
No, it's a hard topic. This is different from a simple case. I think we try to get our committee to discuss this. Maybe subcommittee we can talk about this next time.
Definitely. And go ahead, Nina.
Yeah, so I think that between what Kylie said and Louis, what you said, I think there's a lot of similarity and overlap that I agree. I think those are some really good points. And I think it even relates to the issue at hand that we were discussing, which is kids want to fit into some group. And when we look at whether it's their ethnic identity or some other way that they can gain some notoriety, they're going to gravitate towards it, and they're going to feel some security in whatever that is that they're getting. So whether that's that they're chosen by their teachers as the speaker, or they're chosen by their peers as the one to say things that stir up some sort of response, and I think that everyone is really saying a lot that, this idea of this prism that we are complex and that we have all these different aspects of ourselves. I think one thing to do is help children see that, and I think that would help to empower them where they need to be, and to mitigate any unfortunate, social media or other ways that kids are getting, likes and clicks that continue to foster the wrong type of choices. I think there's a lot to be said about that, because if those kids knew they could offer more than that, maybe they would. Right.
Thank you. Tibisai, and then I have another question for everyone.
So I underlined in the book, it may be comforting to teach our children to do as I say, not as I do, but the reality is that children follow our example, not our advice. And I think that sometimes we censor on what we tell children instead of what we do to show children that we're actually inclusive, and thinking about who comes over to our home, who sits around our dinner table, whose homes do we go to, who do we engage with outside of work, how are our communities inclusive, how do we pick out books or TV that we watch or streaming shows that we watch, so that we can actually look into the windows through media of other experiences that might not look like our own. So there's a lot of talk, I feel sometimes, that makes us feel good about what we're saying we want to do because we want to feel like good people. But then when you start dissecting our actions in our day to day, we are a society that is very segregated. We are very, very segregated in how we move through the world. And there are other reinforcing factors that allow us to feel safety in that segregation. And then we expect our kids to go into schools and know how to deal with integration. That's very limited, by the way, and that has gotten significantly worse as the years have gone on. We're more segregated today, sadly, than we were in the 70s in school districts. So I think that there has to be a point of reflection. I can't ask my kid to do something that I'm not willing to do myself. And I think that that's something important. And I usually challenge adults to think about how diverse our circles of trust are and our circles of influence outside of work. Not just the people we work with, but like, who do we hang out with? Because all of those things create the break in the single stories that we've been fed through media, through these homogenous microcosms that were created maybe by our parents, or sometimes we continue to create for ourselves. So we have to interrogate how we put ourselves into situations where we're able to, you know, not block, but almost change or put a barrier into the echo chambers that we naturally fall into. We naturally fall into these echo chambers, and we don't really realize it, right? Because we're going through our day to day. And I think that becomes an important piece of this. It's modeling, right? Like going into communities that are different from our own and bringing our children and showing children, you know, the multifaceted world and the multifaceted amount of people that exist in the world. And I think I think we put more barriers on ourselves than we think we do. But it does come, it's intentional. You have to be intentional about it. So those are some of the things. And Louis, one thing that I'll say in terms of the balance, I always think about the balance being difficult because we live in a society that is very individualistic, and the communal good sometimes gets lost in our own work towards getting what we want as individuals. And I think that we need to think about how our wants ultimately serve a greater purpose of positivity for the most amount of people. And that's always how I'm trying to process. How does this need that you want right now, how does not going to bed right now, Adrian, serve our entire family? Because when you don't go to bed right now on time, in the morning, you are crabby and you are upset. And everybody gets off to a worse start when you are screaming in the morning. So how does this need of yours serve our entire family community at large? And have the kids reflect on that. So those are just my 2 cents in terms of balance. And I'm sorry, I outed my own kid, so I felt like that was okay, Matt.
Yeah, that part's fine. Yeah, I like that. I do have a second question, and then Elizabeth, you'll get the first word with it. And this question, I'm kind of combining two things from the second chapter. One of the things, just to give everyone else the context who's watching and doesn't have the book, a question says, how comfortable are you discussing tough table topics with your kids? Another one says, how comfortable are you talking about race with other adults? What about with your kids? And the question I'd like to pose to this group is, how comfortable are we talking about tough topics in our professional space? And for students, obviously your professional space in this context is school. For those of us who are district employees or, board members, I would count that as in this building. I think for everyone else, kind of how comfortable are we talking about that in our professional context? And I want to say that because that's what we ask students to do. School is their professional context. Gwen? Oh, sorry. I said Elizabeth was going to have the first word. My apologies. Elizabeth, then Gwen. Not sure.
Okay, to have Gwen go first.
Okay, thank you. My apologies. Gwen, go ahead.
Oh, she left the meeting, it says. No.
Good job, Matt.
Hopefully she'll be back.
Yeah, that one's on me. So when I was saying Rebecca, that's the problem.
There she is. She's muted.
Yes.
Gwen, you're muted. Still muted.
It's not a meeting. I would say keep on trying to unmute and maybe leaving and re-entering again might work. So we can't hear you. It's still muted. What we can do is we can go to the next person. We'll circle back to you on this one. So Elizabeth, do you want to go next?
Okay, sure. Oh yeah, that's a good idea. If Gwen can write in the chat. Gwen, if you could write in the chat what you wanted to say, we can see it. Yeah. I wanted to go back to what Rebecca said. I was talking about the color blindness. I thought that was a good point. I liked the way she dealt with that in the book, and she said that basically, just telling kids, okay, so we're just gonna all be like a big human race, and we're not gonna worry about anything because we're all the same deep down. So kumbaya, isn't really doing them a service, because in the real world where we all live, even though we're all just one human race, and race is really like a false construct, but in the world where we live, it affects everything. And so to ignore it is, to just let them navigate through this treacherous water without any, without any conversation about it, like making it a taboo. And so, talking about race and, the seems important, so that, it's important to look at race and talk about it. And I think her point in the book was, just like any kind of difference, it should be acknowledged and respected, and then getting to the point of appreciating and finding its beauty, but just ignoring it and pretending it doesn't exist isn't a good way to get to that point. So I thought that was important to go back to. That's all.
Thank you. And I do agree with that point. I also just feel the need to help myself. The pet noises are. I'm working on myself. But yes, no, I absolutely do agree with your point, though. I just want to acknowledge that because I don't want the playback to seem as if I think the point was funny. So no, I think that is an excellent point. So we'll go Amy and then Nina.
Sure, thanks. Just to answer your question, Matt, about comfort level, and when I hear that question, it's the question in itself is about me, and me personally, based on my own experiences and personally and professionally, I feel incredibly comfortable. But the difference between my comfort level and others really shows how I interact in those conversations and how often I have them, and how pointed they are. And I think when you bring it back to the intention versus impact, right? So it's kind of personally at home with 4 children, everybody at their different comfort level in conversations and different understandings of the same exact thing. So my conversations are different, and the same thing happens at work, whether it be a staff member or a student or a parent that I'm that I'm speaking with, I'm very comfortable, but the way I have those conversations is really based on what's going to have the most forward-moving impact on them, and how can I bring them into the conversation, and how can I help them understand whatever it is that we're talking about. So to me, the answer to your question is yes, I'm comfortable, but that's not really what it's about. It's, once, if you are at that comfort level, it's not really about your own comfort, it's about context.
I like that. And also even just the statement, like forward moving conversations. And yeah, thank you. Nina? Oh, you're still muted.
Hi, sorry. Yes, just to add to what Amy said, many ways, because we work in similar environments. I'm a teacher, so those things come up in the classroom, and I have, especially the last 2 years, at times there's been issues that have become heated between different groups of people, and it can be something that is hard for some kids to understand it. Well, I guess I say to talk about, but yes, definitely with other staff members as well, because it is a sensitive topic. I have seen that the choice is usually to kind of minimize the situation that arises that involves racial issues instead of really delving into it. And I think it's just because of a lack of, understanding of how to even broach it. And I think that, again, that gets back to what we're trying to do. But I think that just helping to teach adults and students that, it's there, and how do we talk about our differences and understand each other, which is definitely what she, was writing about. But I've had situations where, and I see it mostly in the hallways, kids yelling things that are offensive and then talking about it. And, it seems like they're more apt to be themselves when they're not in the classroom, and those things really come out. So I've had some conversations that way, but I don't see a lot of people wanting to talk about it. And I think that's part of the problem.
Yes, I definitely agree that engaging in those conversations is a critical part of the work. And I want to underscore too that there's a difference. I saw this as a teacher as well, a difference in what we see in the classroom versus what happens in the hallway versus what happens on the bus versus what happens in the cafeteria, so on and so forth. Gwen, I believe you're unmuted, so the floor is yours.
I hope I am, and I apologize. I'm doing this on my phone, and I'm hitting all kinds of dots and everything, so my apologies. But I have to say that for me, the parts that we've had to read thus far have been very eye-opening for me. It's been a self-reflection because I like to think of myself as being a very open person. And you start reading stuff, you're like, well, maybe that's kind of hitting me. But in terms of, for myself, I think in terms of conversations that I would have outside of my household, I tend to be a little reserved. I'm comfortable with people that I'm familiar and friendly with, but we try to keep the conversation hush hush if someone thinks that it might be offensive to someone else. And I think that we've gotten to a point where some people just really don't give a damn. They just say whatever they want, wherever they want, and it doesn't matter how people feel about it. But I was, just as a reference, I was at the dentist's office this afternoon, and I was speaking to the hygienist, and she was saying that her sons are in a school in Scotia, I believe it was, and she was saying how one of the kids came home and he was very upset because of something that someone had said to him. And they're Hispanic, I think, or Mexican. And, we started talking about how there was a time when you wouldn't say those things to people. And now people are just comfortable to say anything and everything, and it just doesn't matter, how you feel about it. But I find for myself that generally we kind of, friends or family, we tend to kind of keep a conversation kind of low if we think that someone might be offended by it. And so I think that basically in answer to the question, yeah, there is a little concern about having tough conversations in public places, even in work environments. When I worked for the state, we would, maybe walk to lunch so that we could have a conversation that we didn't want to, to have around other folks to be offensive. And it would never, I would have to say that would never be done in a way to be offensive. It's just a conversation, but you still kind of guard yourself as far as how someone else might interpret what you're saying. So that's it.
No, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. To me, I'm even seeing that as being reflexive of the prism conversation about in the context you're in, we have different lights shining depending on the angle that you're seeing us from. And I think, yeah, there's absolutely a relationship there. We'll go Blanca and then to Tibisai.
I was just going to say that my background as a nurse, I think, helps me to have difficult conversations with people. But as a parent, I have had to be really intentional about discussing things that my parents would never broach with me. I think there were many things. So I'm a first generation American. I think that culturally there were many things that were taboo. I'm still waiting for my parents to talk to me about the birds and the bees. And I have 3 kids and I'm 44. So I'm being very intentional about how I'm trying to raise my kids because I want them to have conversations with me. I think I have many flaws as a parent, but if I've mastered anything, it's that I feel pretty solid. Like my kids will talk to me about anything that is uncomfortable. And that includes things about, sex, gender identity, race. They are mixed race. So those topics are very important at home. And so I think that I have been fortunate enough where I'm also able to speak with some of their friends. Their friends seem to be comfortable with me. So I would consider that to be a personal victory. And I feel pretty comfortable with that.
Yes. Thank you, Fit Blanca. Yeah, that conversation. No, I hear you. So Tibisai and then Katie and then Seema.
I think the question about comfort around race and conversations, it's a little bit different for me because I don't feel I'm comfortable talking about race. What I'm uncomfortable with is how comfortable I've become with the quiet rage that's attached with having to talk about race all the time. Mind you, I'm a DEI practitioner. I signed up to talk about these issues on a regular basis. And I did so because of how I could control the quiet rage that I experience when folks are saying things to you that are so of the antithesis of your experience. And when you have data to support that this is not only happening to you, it's like society is gaslighting you. That's what it feels like. It's like you're being gaslighted by an entire society. And the audacity of the folks who actually have the power to change that gaslighting, not wanting to talk about the issue when you bring it up. That is what's frustrating. It's not having the conversation. It's about the emotional gymnastics that I have to go through to live my life every single day and be considerate of people's feelings when they don't experience the things that I experience when I just simply walk through the world. That is what's so difficult. And that's where my discomfort lies. And I often tell people, if you want to do this work and if you want to have these uncomfortable conversations, you need a good therapist. You need somebody to spit the venom out with. Because what you are doing every day is putting yourself out there. And you don't know if the person that's in front of you has a tool that is just going to peel. It's like a chemical peeling of the first layer of your skin that leaves you then vulnerable for the rest of your day. For the rest of your day. Some of these microaggressions feel like, getting mugged. You don't want to do anything to make it worse. So you sit there and you endure until it's over. And you're so used to it that you can't even process it in the moment. The rage of it comes to you years later. So when I hear these students saying, and bringing up things that happened to them in elementary school. I understand that. I get that. Because sometimes in the moment, you can't even process what just happened to you. And then all of a sudden, you hear a story from a friend that tells you, oh, do you know that was abusive? Oh, do you know that was discriminatory? And all of these things come flooding back into your mind. And now you're looking at it from these different angles and wondering, where were the adults? Why didn't I feel comfortable speaking to someone? Why don't people in my life know that this happens and that this could possibly happen to me? So I feel comfortable having the conversation. I'm just sad that I feel comfortable having the conversation.
All I'm going to say, Katie and then Seema.
Two parts of it. For teaching young children, she referenced that sometimes in their misunderstanding they will say things that people would find hurtful, and just that having that comfort and being able to talk through with them their comments that they make, or helping them to learn from them and how to respond to that. That's a big piece of it as a teacher, is helping them, being able to have the comfort to have those conversations and understand that when they do say something, how you react and how you guide that conversation, the importance of that. She was referencing it as a parent, but obviously as educators, it's what we do also. And then the other part, really, as Board of Ed, a big piece of that role now, and for school administrators, is being able to have those tough conversations with adults, because certainly in this last school board campaign, a big piece of that was being able to have tough conversations about some people's misunderstandings. And I think it's become a much more significant, obviously, part in education of being able to have those conversations with adults and becoming more comfortable with that, and being comfortable with being able to talk about what's happening in education and to advocate for students. So.
Absolutely. Thank you. Seema?
I was just going to say kind of what Blanca was talking about, that even though I talk about race and ideas connected to race professionally, through work and obviously in the board stuff, but as a parent, I feel like I still am sometimes not explicit or intentional. And I think that will just passively or implicitly pass on to my kids. But, I'll hear statements or questions and I think to myself, oh, I guess I did not make that clear. And, even though we talk about these things. So I imagine if you're not having these conversations regularly, like if you, are working and this is not something that you talk about, I feel like it's probably even more difficult and more challenging to talk about at home. I thought of this because I think the middle school kids had a survey to take today and they had to fill out like demographics. And my daughter came home and she was like, she's like, Mom, I know I'm more than one race. So I put multiracial. I'm like, good, you're triracial. Cause she was like, it's two or more is multiracial. But it occurred to me, I'm like, oh my God, I thought we knew this. Like, I thought we were past that. But still, it's just something that we don't talk about enough. And I have to say, not to bring up not so much the incident last week at the football game, but the conversations that happened after. I think I've heard from many different friends and parents, and it occurred to me that it was really just kind of like eye-opening to hear about which families had said, oh yeah, we talk about this, like my kid knew why this was not a good thing, whereas others were like, I don't think my kids would have known that. And it was like it wasn't intentional. It was a truly like, just not conversations that they have. And I thought to myself, it was just eye-opening. It was just a good reminder to me that our conversations, and me, someone who's comfortable talking about race for the most part, it's still hard to pass that on to my kids. And so if you're not talking about that regularly, I imagine it's really challenging to talk about that at home. And kind of like what Blanca said, my parents were immigrants too. We just did not talk about that, even though we were brown and they were immigrants and English was not their first language. It just like kind of assimilated in and forgot about all of that somehow. So it's just really interesting. I don't know if I added anything, but this is a good conversation.
I agree. I'd also like to add, same thing, immigrant parents. And so some conversations we had very in depth and some not at all. Mike Laster, and then we'll move on to the last topic on our agenda.
Well, so I just, the student survey that Seema referenced today, I'm pretty proud that we were able to push that out to our middle school students, because we're really trying to get a sense of whether or not all of our students have a sense of belonging here at the middle school. I mean, we've been talking about having this conversation with students earlier than the high school for quite some time. So I think this is the first attempt for us to be able to gather some data and see how our students are feeling, especially from a 6-12 perspective. The pre and post survey idea that came out of our K-12 P2 planning committee this summer, I think is a good one, which is why we're doing it. So I'm happy to hear that students are got the email and are interested in completing it, and we'll see what the data says. So it'll be interesting to see how we use that moving forward. So thanks.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean,
I also want to, before we move forward, I want to thank Matt. In terms of DEI in action, another action item is Matt joined us today at the middle school for our faculty and staff meeting to give an update on where we are as a district, moving forward, and the historical sort of, piece of this work. And despite the current challenges that we're facing, he did a fantastic job. I appreciate him coming and sharing that information with our staff. And I think that it's important for us to continue to do that moving forward. So thanks, Matt. And that's another example of DEI in action. So
thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. Thank you. And honestly, even bridging those two things between the discussion and that survey, I think that is you having and being willing to approach those tough conversations in that professional context and the context that we're surrounded by. That really, it was a highlight moment being able to stop by FMS. And we were laughing about even after we were talking with a few teachers afterwards, just laughing about the last time I was there, and just funny theatrics that had happened at the time. So never shortage of smiles at FMS. And for our last topic, it's food for thought. And just as a reminder for folks watching at home, especially if this is your first one, this wouldn't be a reminder, but this is kind of a new thing we're looking at this year. And it's a spreadsheet that folks on the committee can write things into. And with time permitting, we'll kind of dive into them and talk about them a bit. Obviously, we're not going to have time to go really into a lot of depth with these things. But I'll share the different topics that came up, and then we can kind of think about as a group where we want to go from here with these different topics. Thinking to the rest of the steering committee members that seem reasonable to kind of take that approach. Okay. So the different topics that came up, there were two main branches. One of them I already addressed a little bit in DEI in action, so I'll focus on the calendar related topics. And there's 3 subcategories in that. So the first one is very time relevant. So Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day. We kind of heard that this is something that the research committee already started to dive into. And I do think it's really important to share that I've heard from a couple of different members of the community have engaged in conversations with some staff surrounding this. And one of the things that we talked about last year was that the conversation wasn't done last year. And so I do definitely want to make sure that that's something that we do end up revisiting. And the conversations that I've had with staff and as well as with community members, those are certainly to continue. Same thing with research and also looking at what's happening in districts surrounding us as well. And for anyone who may not be aware, last year we just had Columbus Day on our calendar. This year we had both Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day, and they're kind of jointly on the calendar this year. And so part of this discussion to come, maybe a little bit today, but also in the future, is where are we looking to go with this? The next one is also looking at religious holidays. This Eid would be an example. That's something we talked about last year. Students made presentations to the board. Dr. Wiles and I both earlier this year were able to stop by the Muslim Student Association and engage with students this year who are in the club. And this is still absolutely something that students are interested in pursuing. And so also, I think this is a place to really amplify their voices and to reflect their thoughts, not to change those thoughts. And then also the topic of athletic practices on religious holidays, where we'd like to go with that. So I know that we have limited time, but I'll kind of leave the floor open for anyone who wants to kind of comment on any of these three different things. And we can kind of engage in them and can plan to have these items as like standing items going into, not standing items, but slotted items in our next meeting. Rebecca.
I was just curious about the Columbus Day, Indigenous People Day question. Is the research committee looking at like what other school districts do, or what exactly are they looking at?
Yes, I can answer this, but obviously anyone else on the research subcommittee can please feel free to chime in. So one of the things is looking at, okay, what do other districts have on their calendar right now? What discussions, if any, have happened in those districts? Last year, one of the things that we looked at was the briefing, the press release that came from the White House. Another one was released this year. So taking a look at those two things, seeing what's happening in New York City, and like kind of getting guidance. Okay, what's happening in the state and in the area around us to help us kind of inform where we're going as well. That's the gist of it. Anyone else any thoughts that they want to
put into the chat something that I just found in my email from all that stuff. So I'll put that in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else know it's literally last minute thoughts?
Matt, I just wanted to, oh, sorry, I didn't raise my hand.
No, fine. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I really appreciate like even having this space to talk about these things, because had it not been this committee, like I knew last year's press release from the White House had called it Indigenous Peoples Day for a year. And had it not been this group, I wouldn't have realized that they changed that for this next year, which I just was surprised. But it just made me think of like, oh, I have more reading to do and more learning to do. And I never would have realized that had this committee not talked about it. So I appreciate that.
Me too. And I think that really does underscore that the nuance that does exist, you know, in the nation as a whole. Mary, and then we can move to wrap up just with our time.
Well, just to comment on your athletic practicing on religious holidays, as a coach, I don't think players or athletes should be required to practice on the religious holidays that they celebrate. They should be exempt from that. I'm surprised that it's even a topic of conversation. The basketball team that I coach, they don't if they can't come because of religious holiday, they don't come.
But I think the issue is that, for instance, with Eid, if students who observe Eid, don't come to school, they're missing out on all the classes and the school stuff. So everybody else is going to school, but not them. So they are disadvantaged by having to not go because of their religious holidays. So the Christian holidays, everybody doesn't go. But on Eid, only the Muslim students stay home. And the same way, Yom Kippur, there might be an optional practice, but the Jewish people will miss out on the sports practice because so maybe they won't be in as excellent shape for the race or whatever. So, I mean, people who are in that group are missing out on something that other people are getting. So I think that was the issue.
Yeah, I don't understand that. As I tell my basketball players are made between April and November when you get in the best shape. If you're going to miss a day during the season because of religious holiday, it is not going to make or break you.
Maxine?
I really love that message, Ms. Smits. I think that's like, I run all 3 seasons. My coaches, Coach Julianne, Coach Kozier, Coach Scanlon, they've always been really great about like making sure that like girls are like girls like they're okay that girls miss practices for family events or religious holidays because like they understand that we have things going on outside of practice. If I ever have an issue, I know that I can like go to them about it with that stuff. So I think that like while I know that like I miss out on things, I also understand that I am one of very few Jewish people on my team. And in that same breath of it's not fair for like things to go on without me, I also carry the idea of it's not fair for 60 girls to miss out on an opportunity to be better because of one student. So I guess like, where does the line get drawn again? Their practices on any religious holidays are always optional. And for me, I always feel that it's like, it's not optional as in like optional, but it's mandatory. It's like optional as in like, it's completely okay.
So I think that everyone has given great insights that we can continue to explore at our next meeting. This is obviously a topic that's going to draw a lot of differing opinions. And I think it's great that that's why we're putting it on the agenda for next time. So having said that, Elizabeth, yes? Oh, you're muted. You're muted, Elizabeth.
Sorry, I still have a question. I have a question for Seema. In the beginning, Seema, when we were talking about the incident, you said that you thought that the adults were setting the kids up for failure. And I'm still curious about what you meant about that. If you were talking about
I'm sorry. I didn't mean that they were setting like intentionally. I just meant that that was set up, you know, not having thought through what could happen. I don't have kids at the high school. I have not gone to a football game this year. Gone in the past, so I know it's grown in terms of like what happens there. So I don't know the details, and I'm not even sure. Still trying to find out how that is all decided upon, put together, the spirit days, all those things. I just meant that, if there are adults in charge or involved, then where was that breakdown? Because this could have easily just not have happened. And yeah, that's all I know from, the information I know. It just seems like this is a no-brainer.
AKA everything that can go wrong will go wrong. Anticipate all issues. Absolutely. Are there any final comments before I look for a motion to adjourn our meeting for this evening? Scanning the boxes quickly. I see no further comments. So can I get a motion to adjourn our meeting for today? Maxine and Elizabeth. Those are the names that I saw. All right, wonderful. So thank you everyone for this engaging meeting. I really always enjoy it and appreciate it. And Matt, I don't want to ever do this again. I put it on record. I'm just joking. Whenever you want, I'll do whatever you need. I got you.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Have a great evening.
Good night.